Welcome to this week's episode of Eye on the Tigers. I'm Delaney Barrow, joined by Andy Hewling. Before we get too much into Auburn football versus Arkansas, let's talk soccer. The past 2 weeks, Auburn soccer's games have been postponed, causing them to miss a match versus Texas A&M first and last week against LSU. The Tigers were set to play Ole Miss at home this Sunday, but due to SEC COVID protocols, the game has been pushed back to Tuesday. Andy, how do you think yet another setback is going to affect the Tigers' performance on Tuesday?
Well, they've been sitting here now for 2 weeks looking to play a match, and they haven't had it yet. But hopefully Tuesday they're able to get back out on the field at home against Ole Miss and compete. And I have to say, if I were a player, I would definitely be feeling the effects of not playing, because you've played one match but then had to wait 2 weeks, and practicing helps, and doing drills and keeping the repetition going, but that game readiness is always going to go away when you're not playing as much. So I think Auburn will struggle a little bit, but hopefully for them they're able to find their form and get back to action.
I agree. I have no doubt there will be some struggles. It's only going to be their second game since their first at home, September 18th, and that's a long period without any real competition. I'm sure they've practiced and scrimmaged, but there's really no experience like a real game. And we've talked in past weeks about how young the team is, and I think that this is going to be really hard on them, but I also think it's going to prove how Auburn will play the rest of their season. If they're able to bounce back from a couple of weeks off, I think it's a good testament for the rest of their season's performance, especially because the pandemic is ongoing, and there's no telling that this could happen again later down the road, and they could miss another 1 or 2 games, and it'd be really unfortunate. But how Auburn bounces back from this occurrence is really going to show a lot for the rest of the team. And on the topic of Ole Miss, they played really aggressive in last week's match, but they ended up losing to Mississippi State. And they took a lot of shots on goal, but I don't think that'll be an issue for the Tigers, as they do have a very talented young goalkeeper in Prohaska. And I think that I'm looking forward to them bouncing back. I have no doubt that there will be some errors, but I don't think it'll be anything too major. And I think that Coach Karen Hoppe has prepared the team well, and I think it's going to be a good match here on the Plains. Now for football. Auburn will be hosting Arkansas in their second home game of the season and third overall. Last week, they lost by a decent amount at UGA, and their ranking dropped from 7 to 13. And Georgia's defense last week really came to play. How do you think that Georgia's shutting down Auburn last week is reflective of how Auburn is going to play this week?
Well, Auburn's offense was very vulnerable in Athens. They just were really one-dimensional through the air. The running game had no potency with Georgia's defensive line just dominating the line of scrimmage. I think Auburn's defense also did not cover the wide receivers very well. Stetson Bennett was able to throw for over 200 yards and really had a field day against Auburn's secondary. And even George Pickens got in on the act and got a touchdown grab. I just think overall it was a bad game. I don't think it's representative of who they are as a team. We know this team is talented, but injuries, setbacks, the running game, the offense not coming through is not going to get you a win in a game like that when it mattered. And Auburn, ultimately, it was just a bad day at the office on last Saturday. But this week they have a chance to improve and get better against Arkansas, who's coming in riding high.
Originally, this game was almost a cakewalk. It was an expected win for Auburn. And now the stakes are a little bit higher. I mean, that was a tough loss against UGA, and their defense did come to play. And like you said, Stetson Bennett performed well, and Auburn's running game was not there, and it hasn't been there. Even at Kentucky, it was more of a passing game relying on quarterback Bo Nix. And I think that, this week in press conferences, the players were just talking about all these small mistakes, and they watched film, and they really worked on correcting those. And a lot of people overlook those small mistakes, but they really do add up. And Auburn's performance last week is a first-hand example of that. But speaking of the defense, Auburn just found out that they will be without linebacker KJ Britt this week. He's supposed to get surgery today for torn ligaments in his thumb, and that could have a real effect on the defense. Over the summer, Gus talked about playing the younger players and just getting them more reps in order to prepare for COVID. So one can only hope that those extra reps will also help in this instance. Andy, do you think that the defensive performance is going to, how drastically do you think it's going to be affected by the loss of Britt?
Well, KJ Britt does serve a huge purpose in the linebacking core. He's one of the veterans on that team, on that defensive side of the ball. And I think, obviously, he really just leads the team as a whole. I mean, you look at a lot of pictures and videos, he's always the one in the middle of the huddle. He's always the one encouraging his team. And this is a huge loss, not only for the defense, but for the team as a whole. You lose one of those guys who's just been one of the huge staples, team captain this year. And him going down is really good. It's got to be next man up for the Auburn defensive, for the defensive linemen. And it's going to be really tough without him because you're going to lose a guy who's making a lot of tackles, and then it's just making this defensive team more depleted. So yes, it's going to have a huge effect. But whoever takes his place, he's going to have to step up and make plays.
Yeah, not only are you missing a huge defensive player, but you're missing an all-around leader on the team and a good personality. And week 1, before they played Kentucky, previewing the game, he was talking about how excited he was for the matchup, like being a kid at a fair, which makes it all the more tragic that he's going to miss an unknown amount of this season. And the team is now going to have to look, especially defensively, at leaders on the field such as Owen Papo and Jacoby McLean. And just Papo earlier this week was talking so highly of KJ Britt's determination and his effort and how they practically had to drag him off the field against UGA because he was so determined to just play through his injuries even though they were paining him. But yeah, it's just going to be next man up, and hopefully the leaders will coach these younger, less experienced players to fill Britt's place. It's going to be a huge hole to fill, but I know Auburn's going to do their best to fill it. On to the matchup as a whole. Coach Gus Malzahn this week was previewing it, and he spoke so highly of the game and just how they're expecting Arkansas to bring their best, and he even complimented Coach Sam Pittman and the team he's put together, and I think that shows a lot about Auburn's standard and how they're expecting them to play to the highest level, even if it may not be an expected win for them, and they're coming in here with high stakes, and they're coming off a big win against Mississippi State, who the previous week knocked off reigning national champions LSU. And what do you think that the bragging rights are going to be surrounding this game if Arkansas were to win, Andy?
Well, obviously Arkansas has not won a game until last week in the SEC. It's been 20 games, and I think they have a chip on their shoulder. They want to tell people that, hey, we're turning this program around. Because Arkansas back in the day used to be a really good program. I mean, they had the likes of Darren McFadden and Felix Jones, these guys who were really good running backs for Arkansas, and they were a good team that you had to respect them every time you played them in the SEC West. But now over the last decade, it's been different because Arkansas has just lost a lot of talent, a lot of other guys going to other schools around the South, and they just haven't had the kind of quality of players that they normally would get in the state of Arkansas. But now, Gus being added into it, Gus was from Arkansas, and he almost ended up going to coach there before he even came to Auburn because he coached high school football there. And then Chad Morris being the former head coach there. So you've got a lot of Arkansas roots on the Auburn coaching staff. So sure, I mean, there's a lot at stake for both teams. I mean, Auburn's trying to bounce back here, but Arkansas is just trying to prove their worth this year, trying to tell people that they need to stop writing them off every year to be last in the SEC West.
Yeah, and you mentioned a really good storyline. Offensive coordinator for Auburn, Chad Morris, used to be Arkansas's head coach, and earlier this week, a lot of the Arkansas players were talking about how they're going into this game without any emotion, and Coach Sam Pittman said it was just another game for them, business as usual. But the Auburn players, especially Nick Brahms, spoke really highly of Chad Morris and how they're all planning on putting in that extra effort and they're extra determined to win for this coach.
I would say it's definitely personal for him. And so in that matter, we're playing for him. We're playing for each other, man. I love that guy. I love Chad Morris, man. Coach Morris is awesome, and I'm going to play for him. I'm going to play hard for him. And I think everybody is, honestly, because nobody takes him for granted because he's a great person. He's a great man. He's a great coach. And so we're all going to, this is his former team that he's head coach for. So, we're going to play hard for him. Yeah, I've been real happy. These guys are tough, man. We're not going to let anything, we're not going to fold. That's the big thing. I think a lot of people who would have been in our situation would have folded. I mean, we've got tough guys. We've got fighters, man. And, we're going to fight for Auburn. We're going to fight for this program and our coaches and each other. And so I think that's what we're doing. We're rallying together, man. We're grouping together, and, we're looking forward to the rest of the season. We're going to let Georgia beat us twice.
First of all, we're glad to be back home. Like I said, the week 1 atmosphere was really good, and really looking forward to being back home. Looking at Arkansas, they had a huge, really a big-time win against a ranked team on the road. Very impressive when you watch them on film. They'll come in here ready to play. Their head coach, Sam Pittman's doing a great job. He's got his team playing very well, playing with great passion, and so we're expecting to get their best. Like I said, overall, playing a team that's coming off a big win, and but we're glad to be back home and to get to try to get back on track. Looking at this 10-game SEC schedule.
Now on to Player of the Week. Andy, who's your Auburn Tiger to look out for in the match versus Arkansas?
I think fans should look out for Anthony Schwartz this week. He really needs a big game this week, and I think he'll get it. The Tigers are going to be probably more pass-heavy, even though the conditions may not be great for throwing the football. It's supposed to be rainy and wet. But I think Auburn could use short plays like screen passes to their advantage, and Anthony Schwartz is their guy to do that. So I think he will can have a big game, but also, Auburn's passing game in general will look to be on the spotlight in this game.
My player to watch is Bo Nix. He had not a great performance last week against UGA, but he did look really good against Kentucky, and he looked to have shaken off that rust from freshman year and just learned and grew a lot from his first season as a Tiger. And last week he took a lot of the blame from the loss against the Bulldogs, just saying that he made some pitiful throws and he missed more passes than his receivers missed. So I think that shows what a great leader he is, and statistically he has played much better at home than away, and I think that once again he's going to look to show out and just build upon his performance last week, and I think that he's really going to go off this weekend. Now on to our Pick'em segment. Our first college matchup of the week is Oklahoma versus Texas. Andy, who do you have?
I like Texas in this game. I know they lost last week in a heartbreaker to TCU, but I think the Oklahoma Sooners are just really feeling the effects of the last 2 games that they've played, 2 straight losses, and they've dropped out of the top 25. I think Texas and Sam Ehlinger will really look to be keeping their name up in the top 25, so I think Texas will win this one in a close one.
I do think this is going to be a close game, but I'm going to have to go with Oklahoma. I know I bet against them last week in that upset against Iowa State, but I don't think Lincoln Riley is going to let them win 3 in a row, especially in this rivalry game. And typically in the past, Texas has kind of ended up beating itself in this matchup, and I think that trend is going to continue, and Oklahoma is going to win this matchup. Next game is Georgia versus Tennessee. Who do you have?
I like Georgia in this game. I think coming off the win against Auburn, Stetson Bennett and Zamir White are looking like Georgia's best players on the offense, but I think the defense for Georgia is what I've been most impressed with. Now, Tennessee is coming back into the top echelon of the SEC. I think Jeremy Pruitt is really starting to turn them around. They're ranked 14th right now. Obviously, rankings are a little bit tentative depending on this season and how many teams are playing, but Tennessee is 14th for a reason, and I think they'll make it a close game, but Georgia still wins at home.
I'm going to have to go with UGA as well. While Jeremy Pruitt has put together a very talented team, one of the most he's put together in his career at Tennessee, UGA really proved themselves as contenders last week against Auburn, and Stetson Bennett played well. He played control. He made those smart decisions, and while he's not really a game changer going to take those risky plays, I do think that Tennessee has kind of the advantage in quarterbacks, but UGA's defense is going to shut down Tennessee's offense, even though their offensive line has looked really well so far this season. But Tennessee's last 2 wins were almost expected, so I think that they haven't really proved themselves against that much of a worthy opponent yet, so I'm going to have to go with Georgia on this one as well. For our next college matchup, we have Clemson versus Miami. Who do you have?
I looked at Clemson's schedule this year, and I looked at and circled this game on their list as a potential upset, and I think it will be an upset as Miami has started to look very strong on the offensive side of the ball. I like De'Aaron King, their quarterback. He's thrown for already 736 yards in this season. They've only played a few games, and they are high rolling under Rhett Lashley, and I really like how they play. I think their offense will score a lot of points, and they'll get a defensive stop. It's not going to be easy against Trevor Lawrence, but I think they'll get 1 or 2 turnovers that will change the game, and they'll walk out of Death Valley victorious.
I'm going to have to go with Clemson. They are hosting it in Death Valley. Based on the team's past performances, I do think that they're going to win this one. While their defense hasn't really had that much of a chance to shine yet this year by shutting anyone down or playing any close matches, I do trust Dabo Swinney's recruiting process and how he has prioritized the future of the program. And so I do think that those players, when expected to show out, they will play their hardest. And while Miami, for the first time in a while, does look well-equipped, especially with De'Aaron King, to play a team of this caliber, I don't think it's going to be that close of a match. I'm sure they'll put up a fight, but I do think Clemson is going to win. Now for our final college football matchup, we have Auburn versus Arkansas. Who do you have?
I think this is going to be a really tough, sloppy game. Obviously, conditions are still looking like it's going to be rainy from the outer bands of Hurricane Delta. And I think Auburn will come out victorious, but I think Arkansas's defense will put up a fight. I think both teams really need to work on their rushing attack because they did not have a lot of production the last 2 weeks in the running game. But I think Auburn will start to put that together. I like Tank Bigsby to have a nice game in the running game, and then Auburn's offensive passing performance will improve, and I think the Tigers will walk out victorious.
I have to agree. I also think Auburn's going to win. Like I mentioned earlier, this was almost an expected win for Auburn, but I do think the stakes are a little higher now that they did face their first loss of the season, but they will be playing at home, and typically, along with the student section, even if Jordan Hare is only at 20% capacity, I think that'll give them a slight advantage. Although the rain may keep some students away, that will be a disadvantage to both teams. But I think overall, Auburn feels like more is in this competition for them, especially now that they do have OC Chad Morris on the team, and I think that the Tigers are going to win this matchup. Now on to the NFL. First up, we have Houston versus Jacksonville. Who do you have?
Well, I looked at this game, and both these teams are 0-4, and it's really hard for me to pick a winner in this game. So I'm going to go with a tie. It's going to go to overtime. They can't solve it there, and it will just end up as a 0-0 draw. I'm going to say a tie between these two teams.
I'm going to have to go with the Texans. I do think it's possible to end in a tie. We've already seen that once this year, but I think the Texans have kind of struggled with inconsistency so far this season, but now that Bill O'Brien is no longer the coach, I think that that will no longer be the case, and I think that they also have a chip on their shoulder. They're really going to be looking to prove themselves after his firing, and with a talented quarterback like Deshaun Watson, I think that the Houston Texans are going to win over the Jacksonville Jaguars. Next football matchup is the Colts versus the Browns. Who do you have?
I like the Browns in this game. I think Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham really showed off against the Cowboys last week. I think the Browns are really trending in the upward direction, so I think they'll get the win.
I'm going to have to go with the Colts. I do think it's going to be a good game. The Colts have one of the best defenses in the country, although they did lose week 1 to Jacksonville, which is questionable. But I think that these are two talented teams, but this matchup will really show just how talented both of them are. And while the Browns were without Nick Chubb last week, they seem to be playing pretty well without him. But fun fact, their Colts kicker, Rodrigo Blankenship, has outscored all the opponents that his team has faced this season. And I think that as long as the Colts defense comes to play and Blankenship is prepared to make those kicks, I think that the Colts are going to win this one. Next NFL matchup is the Seahawks versus the Vikings. Who do you have?
I like the Seahawks in this game. I think they're really rolling under Russell Westbrook in the offense. I look at DK Metcalf. He's a very good wide receiver out of Ole Miss, and I think he's really leading the wide receiver core, him and Tyler Lockett. I think they're going to score a lot of touchdowns in this game and pull away from the Vikings.
I'm going to have to go with the Seahawks as well. Like you said, Russell Wilson, early contender for NFL MVP. And I think that even though the game does take place in Seattle and normally their fans are the 12th man, I think that the lack of fans will not have a huge effect, and I do think that the Seahawks will win over the Vikings. For our final NFL matchup, we have the Titans versus the Bills. Who do you have?
I like the Bills in this game. I think obviously the Titans, with all their COVID cases, there's a lot of positive cases on the team that's going to affect them. They've already had to move the game up into next week. And I think the Bills will get the job done. Josh Allen's just been really clinical on the offense, and the Bills are just playing really good football right now.
I'm going to have to go with the Bills as well, since it has been a while since the Titans have had technical in-person practices at their facilities. There's a good chance they're going to be a little rusty, and that could really have an effect on the offense, especially Tannehill. But if Tannehill chooses to only hand it off to Derrick Henry, I don't think the Titans are going to have that much of an issue, which could make it a close game. But I do think Josh Allen will lead the Bills to victory. That's all that we have time for you today. For more news or sports updates, head to our website at eagleeyeauburn.com. I'm Delaney Barrow, joined by Andy Hewling, and this was another episode of Eye on the Tigers. Have a great weekend, and War Eagle.